Welcome to the Red Dice Diaries, and this video is a video response to Same Old G's post in the RPG Brigade, where he asked the question, what is the GM's role within an RPG? In his video, Same Old G suggests that the terms Games Master and Dungeon Master are extremely loaded terms that assign an undue importance and a godlike significance to the GM, placing them on a pedestal far above the players of their games. He suggests that the term referee might be a more appropriate and neutral term. To a certain extent, I do agree with this. Now, I was first introduced to the idea of a GM through the terminology storyteller, which is, as far as I'm aware, almost exclusively used in the World of Darkness line by White Wolf, now Onyx Publishing mostly. I only really heard the Dungeon Master and Games Master, DM and GM terminologies when I started playing D&D and later other fantasy RPGs. I think as far as abbreviations go, DM and GM are quite a useful form of shorthand, and they're well known across the role-playing community. If you say to any role player GM or DM, they instantly will have an idea of who you're referring to. Whereas I don't think the terms ST for storyteller or even ref are as widely spread, and there may be some confusion if they're used. Whereas, as I say, if you say GM or DM to a role player, they'll instinctively know who you're referring to. However, I do agree with what Same OG says when he says that a GM shouldn't be placed on a pedestal high above their player characters, to an extent where some of the players in some games almost feel like they have to ask permission from their GMs for their player characters to attempt certain courses of action. I think as a good GM, there should never be a point when you flat out say to a player, no, your character may not take this course of action. Now, if they're going to do something really ridiculous, you may wish to say to them, obviously you can do this, but there will be and possibly are severe consequences for this course of action. Do you still want to do it? And I believe there was a merit called Common Sense in the World of Darkness line by White Wolf that covered this. I certainly found it very useful when I was first starting role playing to occasionally have a GM say, are you sure you want to do that? Bear in mind that there may be some severe consequences for your character if you do. Now, any good GM, if the player says, never mind that, I'm going to go ahead with it, will say, fine, the consequences outlined may occur, but the player has made their choice. And as a GM, it's not your job to get in the way of players playing their characters. That's not your job at all. It's simply your job to, as far as I'm concerned, portray the NPCs and the background detail of the world and the framework in which your stories are taking place, and allow the player characters to take the actions that they wish based on the stimuli that's going on around them. Increasingly, as I've gone on playing different games, I've come to believe that the creation of the world, the framework in which the stories of the game takes place, should be a collaborative experience, with the players also becoming storytellers alongside the GM, getting them more involved from the start in the creation and the running of the setting. For me, role-playing isn't just about me as a GM, and I GM far more than I play, to be honest, but it's not about me handing down a story from on high to the players and them simply making a few narrowly defined choices. What it is about for me, it's about a group creating a story between all of the members, GM or players, about a bunch of characters that we find interesting and the situations, scrapes and adventures that they get themselves into. However, it can sometimes be necessary, especially if you have more inexperienced players, for the GM to take a little bit more of an active hand in leading the players through what they're doing. Almost a sort of training wheels style scenario where the GM leads the inexperienced player on a little bit until they're comfortable enough to jump in with everybody else. However, it's not your job to hold them at that stage. It's your job simply to keep them going along until they're comfortable, at which point the training wheels come off the bike and they're ready to ride on their own, and they jump in with everyone else in the group and really begin contributing to the group narrative. As I said earlier on, it's not a GM's job to tell a player that their character cannot undertake a course of action. Now, as far as I'm concerned, players should be drawn into helping create the narrative of a game. And this is something I've been trying to do more in my own game that I'm running via Google Hangouts. And I've started simply by, when the players take out an enemy in combat, having them narrate their own finishing move, I suppose you might say, or how they dispatch the enemy. And this allows them to put a little bit of their own narrative flair, a little bit of their own character, a little bit of their description into the game. And also I'm starting to bleed that forward into other situations, allowing them to narrate certain things within the game. For instance, when if a player character asks me a question about something and that's not fully defined, say the player says to me, "What's the next city like over the hill?" If I've not got anything in particular written down about it, I might say to that player character, "What is the next city like over the hill?" And between the two of us, we can work out the details of that city. The player is rewarded by becoming more invested in the setting. They feel like they've contributed to it. And as a GM, I'm rewarded by the fact that I've had someone else's input into an element of the setting. And also I know that I'm going to end up with a city beyond the hill that at least one, or probably more, of the player characters is interested in visiting in the future. I feel that this sort of thing is far easier in the more narrative / storytelling systems that encourage player input rather than some of the games which encourage more of a segregation between the GM and the players. However, player opinion can be taken into account in any game by any half-decent GM. I also find that having a game that doesn't run 100% according to a strict timeline laid down by the GM is far more interesting for the GM themselves. I certainly know that I found that since getting players involved more in the narrative and bringing them more in as storytellers in their own right, it's less about me turning up with all my notes at the start of the session and going through the motions, simply rolling a few dice every now and again, with the only unexpected twists occurring if someone gets taken out in a combat. Having player narrative input has quite often in the games that I'm running led to scenes that I completely didn't envision at the start of the game. It's led to scenes that I did envision turning out in ways I could have never imagined, and has led to whole reams of plot that I've never considered before the players got involved and brought an additional viewpoint and an extra level of interest into the game. And this is something that's really helped to keep my interest as a GM high in the game. And on behalf of the players, they feel invested in the game, they feel like they've contributed to a game, and this keeps their level of interest high. They know they have a certain amount of input into the game. It also encourages them to be more honest with their feedback, since they know that in the game you're willing to take their views on board, their input, therefore they're more willing to provide it to you when you ask for it. However, I do think it's not the sole responsibility of the GM to ensure the smooth running of a game or that people turn up on time, etc. I think that in an ideal game, everyone takes a measure of responsibility for these things, the smooth running of the game, as well as the stories told within the game. And I think by having everyone involved on a narrative basis, it gets everyone invested in a game. Everyone feels like they're contributing and taking part in the game, and it results in a more enjoyable experience for everybody. It also reduces that pedestal that some games and some GMs can find themselves on, when you're seen more as just another storyteller, albeit one who happens to portray the NPCs and a lot of the incidental world detail. It means that the players aren't afraid to ask you questions. They don't feel like they have to ask you permission to do stuff. They don't wait for you to describe what their characters are doing. They're quite happy knowing that they can narrate parts of the setting to jump in and describe what their own characters are doing. Well, I hope that's revealed a little bit more about what I think the role of a GM is in an RPG. If you have any comments about this video, please put them down below. If you enjoyed it, I hope you'll consider clicking on like and subscribe to my channel. I'll also put a link to Same Old G's original video down below. And until I see you in the next video I make, thank you very much for watching and for listening.